Hi, I'm Matt from VIEON,
I am David from Lines of Silence.
and this is episode number 4 of the AnalogueTrash Artist on Artist podcast. So, David, who are Lines of Silence?
Well, Lines of Silence started out as a kind of a little side project for myself back in 2020 when we all had a lot of time on our hands and I wanted to do something a little bit different from what I'd been doing on another solo project. But as time went on, I just kind of thought I prefer the name of this project and I kind of prefer where I'm going with it. So I did 2 albums on my own and then started to collaborate with other people, doing sort of kind of slightly freeform improv-y gigs, and then got a friend involved who I'd kind of known from my previous incarnation when I was living in London. He's based in Manchester, Dave Clarkson. We'd kind of been friends for a while, we'd known each other's music, and I invited him to come and play a gig with me. At first, just wanted him to do a little bit of percussion, but actually came in and added a lot more, so he kind of became a member of the band at that stage. So for the last album, Lines of Silence, is myself and Dave Clarkson. Since then, we've actually picked up another member at a gig, which is nice. A person called Andrea, who's going to be playing guitar and some percussion for us as well, and in fact did when we did our last gig together, Matt. So in a nutshell, it's kind of gone from 1 to 2 to 3, so maybe this time next year we'll have 6 people in, or maybe it'll go back to me, who knows.
So, what instruments do you play? What's your background? Because I see you playing guitar on stage, but
Yeah.
there's clearly more to it than that.
Yeah, so I started off as a drummer many years ago, and then sold my drum kit, bought a guitar, never learnt to play the guitar properly, and then kind of life happened and I stopped doing music for a very long time. Tried to pick it up again 15, 20 years ago, I can't even remember now. Playing drums again, that didn't really work out. Had another bit of a fallow period, and then kind of started to discover the electronic side of stuff, so DAWs and all sorts of things. Kind of got hooked on that again, so picked my guitar up, still play it very badly. I've probably improved slightly since those days, but not very much. So I play a lot of things quite badly. So guitar is my main instrument in Lines of Silence, but I also use synths and some drumming sometimes, but generally a little bit more like programming drum machines, or I've got a little drum pad, so sometimes I play that. So a bunch of stuff really.
My interpretation of it is that listening to it, it doesn't sound massively electronic. Actually, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of organic, if you like, instrumentation going on, and the electronics they seem to be more of a garnish, if that's not trivializing it too much. How do you see it?
Yeah, it's a good point actually. What I like about us is I think we're quite hard to pigeonhole really. So I wouldn't say we're an electronic band. And in fact, when people say to me, oh, you're making electronic music, I think, well, we're not really. I mean, we use a lot of production techniques, particularly from Dave's side. So it's a kind of a combination of different approaches and different genres, really. So we don't like to be pigeonholed. So we like to pull in all the stuff, I guess, that's influenced us across the years. So a lot of krautrock in there, but also some kind of more general psychedelic stuff, electronic stuff. Yeah, a whole bunch of things. But what about yourself, Matt? Tell us a little bit about VION and how you got started and sort of where you come from musically.
So the project, known as VION, as it were, maybe got kicked off in very late 2012, something like that. I've played keyboard since I was about 8 or 9 years old. I was a kid obsessed with Jean-Michel Jarre, and frankly, nothing's really changed on that account. But my parents bought me a sort of Yamaha keyboard and a Jarre songbook, when you used to get actual music written down in sheet format. Crikey. And I didn't really do a lot with it until I kind of finished university. And then I thought, well, maybe it's time to write some of my own stuff and to see where that goes, really. So I started writing stuff. I think I had an album kind of ready at the start of 2014, which was an early version of The Sound of the Future. Then did the album launch gig in Coventry, also where I met my wife now.
Well, at the gig?
At the gig, yeah.
Oh, wow, fantastic.
So this was an outdoor gig, so following me trying to be a sort of budget Jean-Michel Jarre, we were in the garden of this pub that's long since disappeared in Coventry, and there was this big metal fire escape next to us, and there's a song I do which is on the Sound of the Future, actually, Sonic Highway, and halfway through there's a big guitar solo, and I had this wireless kit set up for my guitar, And it was a completely spontaneous moment, but I decided that in the sort of middle eight bridge of that song before the guitar comes in, I was going to run to the top of the fire escape and do a guitar solo whilst coming down the fire escape. Anyway, my now wife was in the audience and was clearly so impressed by my ridiculous antics that she decided that she wanted to hang back and have a chat with me afterwards, and so the rest is history, etc.
That's fantastic. Sorry to interrupt you, but you said a lot of interesting things there, and one was before the fire escape incident. So you talked about like when you started off in music and reading music, and so did you have what you consider to be a proper, in inverted commas, musical education?
I had music teachers for a few years, but I kind of went off that route fairly quickly, partly because I became a teenager and teenagers get grumpy about extra tuition and stuff, but also because ultimately what I really wanted to play was all of this Jar and Vangelis stuff and all that kind of thing. And I didn't really enjoy that much being made to play things that I didn't actually like, so I kind of took it and ran off with it by myself, really. And then I kind of started to build a very small collection. Well, over the years, I kind of upgraded my keyboards. I mean, as with so many people who were kind of learning in the mid 2000s, my first proper, what you might call a synthesizer, was probably the Micro Korg. And then I had a Roland Gaia after that, and both of those are on the Sound of the Future album. But having said that, there is nothing more boring than a man harping on about his keyboards. So I'm going to swiftly move past this because we just lost all of our listeners.
I beg to differ. That was. I'm sure we'll talk about guitars as well, because how could we not? But yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I had I probably learned to play the recorder like everybody in the 70s, and then that was it until I picked up drums and then actually learned how to read drum music. So I can still vaguely remember what the different sort of durations of notes are, but I've never learned pitch, and I've tried it on so many occasions and I just can't do it. Try to learn tab for guitar and I can kind of just about do that, but yeah, so it's difficult for me actually because I can never really remember what I played. I have to kind of relearn it because I can't write it down. But do you score your music, or I mean, what's your process for writing and recording?
Oh, well, what I should have said really was that when I stopped taking music lessons was also approximately the time when I forgot how to read sheet music. So no, I definitely don't score anything. My process for writing, noodling. Essentially, it's switch everything on, noodle until I find a sequence or a melody or a chord progression or a rhythm that I'm happy with. Then normally stop, forget about it. And if I keep coming back to it over the course of several sort of sessions, I think, well, this is probably catchy enough to be worth recording. And then eventually, I will get around to recording it into FL Studio or Reaper or whatever, and then kind of building on that essentially and trying to flesh it out into a track. And then the track becomes 13 minutes long. I realise that nobody's going to have that much patience. And then there's a fairly severe editing process with most tracks at the end. So I think the best example of this is probably the title track from The Sound of the Future. In its original form, it was genuinely about 12 minutes long. I think the version that's on the album is about 7.5 minutes, and the version we play live now is about 5, because I don't think anyone's got the patience to go longer than that.
So the first track I'm choosing from you, Matt, from VIEON, is Intercity. I first heard this track about a year or so ago and I absolutely loved it first time I heard it. It's just got that really great kind of motoring beat and those classic VIEON vocoder vocals, and it's about trains, so what's not to love?
What about you? How does the writing process work for you? But particularly because your instrumentation is very different to mine.
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I mean, I met up with Dave yesterday and we were kind of talking about this because I've been through a little bit of a... I mean, it's typical, isn't it? Like, you have 2 weeks off from work and you think, great, I'm going to do all this stuff. And then you sit down and you think, oh, I haven't got any ideas. But generally, yeah, I'll fire up Ableton, which is the DAW I use. I might make some beats, or I might just kind of muck around on my guitar. But what I usually do is try and record something into Ableton, even if it's just like... I don't know, a couple of bars of a riff or something, just so I can remember it, because I'm absolutely terrible at waking up like first thing in the morning going, oh, I've got a great idea, and then I never record it. As I say, I can't write music, so I forget it very quickly. So it's a lot of it is throwing mud at a wall, really. I mean, recently I've gone through a whole bunch of ideas that I came up with post the release of the last album and thought there's got to be something in here that's worth working on, and there wasn't. It was all shit. So it's a bit hit and miss, really. That's why I like working with other people, because now I feel like I don't have to have a complete idea. I can send some of those those sketches off to Dave. He can do something, he can send them back, it can trigger some ideas in me. So I really like that collaborative process, really. I find that that's a lot more productive than just trying to do stuff on my own.
I think this is something that I probably need to learn, actually, because my rate of output is charitably described as famously slow, in the sense that since our last full EP, which was 2016, we've had a live album, a remix album, and we've done singles, but I've decided that what we want to do next, it's got to be an album, partly because we've never released anything on vinyl. And to ask the kind of money for it that you ask for a vinyl, which is not an inconsiderable amount of money, I think it needs to be a substantial amount of music. The album is themed around British Rail, which is,
fantastic.
For some people, is going to be extremely exciting, like me. And for some people, let's hope they give it a chance anyway. But I think the first track that got made for this new album was late 2021. So I've been working on this for at least 3 years now. Part of that is probably because it's just me. I know there's more guys on stage, but it is just me when I write the music. And so it can be very difficult to be certain of your ideas in a lot of ways. Obviously, I bounce some stuff off the other guys, but really, I always feel a little bit hesitant about stuff until pretty much we've got it out there and people have listened to it. But by that time it's finished, it's done, it's out. The horse has bolted at that point. So I think part of the problem with the rate of work for me is the fact that I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself to make sure that the next thing is better than the last thing, which can be quite tough in some ways because we go all over the place. I don't know if you get the same.
Because you don't want to put out something that's not as good as the last thing, do you? I mean, that's the worst thing you can do, really.
So the first track I've picked from the Lines of Silence discography is The Long Way Home, title track off your new album. And it's just a wonderful classic bit of krautrock, but it's kind of inverted a little bit from your typical sort of motoric style. So this side is on the bass and the drums are a little bit sort of changed. It's just brilliant. Have a listen to this.
Oh, I love that. Wrap your ears around this. You talked about the structure of the band. So I've seen you, I think every time I've seen you, you've had, what, 4 of you on stage? Is it 3 or 4?
It's 3 or 4.
And then, like you said, you don't necessarily get people that involved in the writing process, but you kind of bounce stuff off them. Like how does that work? And are the people who perform with VIEON, are they happy sort of being in that position where they're more like the performers of your stuff, or are you looking to expand VIEON into more of a kind of a collective in terms of writing?
I'm probably going to get some messages after I say this, but in all honesty, the other guys, I don't think they're that bothered about contributing to the music writing process. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an idea of how the band is structured. So I write the music, and when we're playing live, everything that you see me doing is live. I'm not miming or whatever. Then we've got Steve, he runs the sort of back end of the show, really. So Steve's not a musician, or wasn't a musician, I should say. He did a bit of DJing before, but he saw the advert that we put out and went, yeah, okay, I'd like to apply for that and see what's what. So we mix everything ourselves on stage. He looks after the mixing of that. Between tracks, he's sort of setting stuff up, and then he's the one that starts and brings everything to a close. He also uses a sort of sample pad to add sort of percussive elements on stage, because I would like it to be more live where possible. So that's sort of Steve's area, but Steve he's a listener of music, really. Then we've got Adi, who does the visual side. Now, Adi's contribution, in the full knowledge that he's in the background listening to us talk, Adi's contribution is the visual side of things. So he is our VJ. He live mixes, adds effects, and all of that stuff to the visual element of the show. I would say that largely what gets put up there is down to him. I sometimes give guiding hands, or if we've got a song that's very specific about what we want to see on. So particularly for the train oriented stuff, you want to get that right. Otherwise you do get letters. So I might supply some relevant archive footage for a particular track, and AD will chop it up and turn it into this sort of montage.
You saying that just reminded me of something I absolutely love when you perform. You show this little clip of is it a kind of a general promo for the Intercity 125 from sometime back in the 80s?
It's an old TV advert, yeah. So I think during the production of Intercity, I don't know, someone must have shared it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and I thought, that's really nice, and it's really nice in two aspects. One is that it's quite light-hearted and quite funny, and it's not something that you expect to see in the middle of a gig. So I thought we could open the song with that. And the other thing is that it's pretty much the only Intercity advert that you can find that doesn't feature Jimmy Savile.
Ooh, yeah. Ouch.
Yeah. So because Intercity is actually a fairly light-hearted song, I think, and it just felt like a nice little break and a little intro to it on stage.
There is a fantastic bit that just cracks me up every time. So the whole kind of conceit about it is like, if you're travelling on an intercity, you won't get stuck in traffic jams. You won't. All these terrible things that happen to you when you're driving a car aren't going to happen to you. But they kind of show that, don't they? So there's this one amazing scene of a police train driving upside the intercity, and the guy leaning out the window and telling him to pull over, which is just my sense of humour to a T, and I absolutely love it.
So that was actually done for real. That's not like done with effects or anything. They actually painted up a whole locomotive in police colours, and for a few weeks afterwards, it was busy out there hauling service trains. So you would find that people would turn up at the station and their train was being hauled by a police livery Class 37. And it's taken on a bit of a life of its own, and you can actually buy sort of like Hornby models and stuff now in limited editions that are the police livery train. Sorry, what were we saying?
Sorry, we were getting a bit off topic there, weren't we?
No, it's all right. I should mention Ricardo Autobahn. Oh, what a stage name.
Indeed.
We first met in Leicester, and he's in Spray with Jenny, and we really liked each other's stuff. And we hit it off very quickly, actually, because we're both massive Jar nerds. And I eventually thought, well, it would be good to have a keyboardist in the band to play some of the other parts, because I always want to have the show as live as possible, but that can be difficult because organising people to get together to rehearse is quite challenging, and the more people you have, the harder that gets. But also the stage sizes that we play on, ultimately we already struggle to fit sometimes even three of us on there. So we have to be a little bit careful. So John is sort of in and out. We've got the show set up in such a way where he can play with us if he can make it, and if he can't, or the stage is too small, or whatever, we can also do it without him. So this is why people up north that have seen us are more likely to have seen us with John than people down south, because he doesn't like driving very far.
But this is it's quite interesting, and it's the same for us. I mean, in that I think we're both like modular, not in the sense of synthesizers, but modular in the sense of a band. So I've done gigs on my own. I've done gigs with three of us. I've done gigs with duos in different combinations, and it's fine. You know, we work it out. So sometimes, for instance, like the last gig we did with you in the Golden Lion in Todmorden, it was myself and Andrea. So we didn't have Dave for that one. So Dave, when he plays live with us, will provide a lot of keyboards and stuff like that, and some electronics. So we had to put a little bit more in the backing. But you say, like, you want to get it as live as possible. So what happens when you're a smaller setup? So that was my dog, by the way. So have you done gigs on your own, or just maybe with one other person? And in that situation, what else is happening? Are you relying more on backings, or?
Yeah. So if we're as a three, it will almost always be me and Steve and AD, and John's stuff effectively gets put on the backing track. So there's a backing track version of John, and then there's a live version. We have played as a two before, so I think we've played it both with me and Steve, and then generally AD will supply a USB stick of visual loops or something like that, and that will kind of go on behind us. It's nowhere near as good as having AD live, but it sometimes needs must. And likewise, sometimes if it's just me and AD because Steve can't make it, I think that's been pretty rare, but it has happened, I will do Steve's mixing part myself live, but it's a lot of work. I quite like all of the back end being delegated to Steve, because it allows me to primarily focus on being a front man, if that makes sense, and trying to interact with the audience a bit more.
Yeah,
because I do like a bit of audience interaction, especially if the gig's going well. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
What about you? What are your thoughts on interacting with the audience, the relationship with the audience for Liza Silence?
Yeah, I find that very difficult, actually, because I started off as a drummer, and there's a reason for that. I quite like hiding at the back, and now I wouldn't say I'm a front man. That's not really what we're like, you know. It's my project, so I kind of feel like, I guess I'm like a spokesman, if anything. We're not a vocal band currently. We are working on some tracks with vocals, but that's much more likely to be Andrea singing rather than myself. So yeah, I find that difficult. What I usually do is just restrict it to a few kind of announcements between tracks. But I think if I've got the sense that people were focusing on me, I'm much more likely to make even more mistakes than I do. So yeah, it's something that I struggle with. And I'm always impressed to see you, particularly when you come out in the audience with a guitar, a particular highlight of any VIEON gig. But you just seem to get into the flow, don't you? And then you're
definitely. I didn't used to be like that, to be honest, but I think I've kind of come to it over the years. But for me, in the performance of particularly the kind of electronic music that we do, where it is overwhelmingly electronic, there's very little organic or kind of more natural instrumentation, if you like. And for me, it's so important to show the audience what you're doing, rather than them taking it for granted. I when I go to see an electronic band live, the absolute last thing I want to see is basically it's normally a bald white man standing behind a MacBook with a MIDI controller and nothing else going on, and it's just not an engaging thing for me personally. Again, maybe this is showing my influences here a bit, but I like to be able to show what we're doing and have a show which is not just musical, but I guess very slightly theatrical, if that doesn't make me sound too much like a knobhead.
Well, no, but it's a performance.
You've got to have a little bit of drama. Yeah,
it's a performance in the sense that, as you say, you can see you guys doing what you do, and particularly when you get the guitar out, you can see like you are a very adept keyboardist. You like even playing the black notes and stuff, you know, that kind of thing. I find very impressive.
Black notes, white notes, we'll play them all. Cool now.
You know, those ones I always find a bit harder to reach, so I tend to avoid those. No, but it's a great performance, and we talked about AD's visuals as well, and I think that is really important. And we started to bring more visuals in as well. We did work with a visual artist who went off and did his own thing. Occasionally worked with another one, but if we don't have someone who can do that live, we'll just use a reel of stuff we stick on a USB stick, because as you say, I mean no one wants to see a bunch of middle-aged blokes like staring at their shoes or sitting behind a laptop. So I think having that visual element is really important, and I hope does make it a little bit more interesting for people.
Yeah, for sure. Thinking back to the last gig where we played together at the Golden Lion, I think there's two things to note. First is that your music, I think, is naturally hypnotic, and the visuals and the style of the presentation lends itself to that very much. I think the other thing is as well is that, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about Lines of Silence being a much more organic band than VION, using more what you would call normal non-electronic instruments. Naturally, you are showing what you are doing much more.
Yeah.
You know, we can see you playing the guitar, we can see Andrea on the percussion and the guitar. It does make a big difference, I think. I think that the showing of what you're doing can in some ways be a particularly tough thing for electronic musicians because of the proliferation of MIDI controllers.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas I don't really see a lot of MIDI controllers in your set. I mean, you do have a laptop, don't you? But it's kind of off to one side.
We have a laptop, and so we do have stuff on backing. I mean, we don't have a live. Well, Andrea is a drummer, but she's been doing additional percussion, so we tend to use that to run the backings on. So some of those there's more going on than others. So we have a couple of MIDI controllers. One is just literally to kick the tracks off in Ableton, and there's one track that we do which is A Stranger Shore on the album. So when we do that live, that's using Ableton kind of as an instrument. I went to this Castles in Space festival a year or so ago, and there was someone who kind of did a presentation about that, and I thought, this is really interesting, because okay, you're using a DAW, but you're using it much more in a performance kind of way. So that one, it's got drums, it's got some samples, it's got some synth patterns. So when we recorded that, those synth pattern MIDI patterns were going out into analog synths, but just because we want to travel light, we tend to use the soft synths within Ableton. But yeah, so that will be me actually interacting with the MIDI controller on that one. So you'll be bringing stuff in, fading stuff in and out, playing with filters, playing with effects and things, and that's quite a fun way to work actually, and it makes a change from just always playing guitar. But yeah, we definitely want to get away from that, as you said, the blokes sitting behind a laptop basically pressing play and maybe fiddling with a couple of EQ things on their mixer to make it look like they're doing something, because it's not that interesting to watch, is it? Let's face it. Okay, so the second track I'm choosing, Matt, is 1985, which features on the most recent AnalogueTrash sampler. And I thought this is really interesting because it's quite different from Intercity. You've got some different vocals in there, so it's got a very different feel to it. And I think there's a bit of a story to it, isn't there? So maybe you can tell us about that as well.
Yeah, so this started off maybe 10 years ago. It didn't quite make it onto our first album, The Sound of the Future, but it's got that kind of vibe about it. And it was originally a demo. It never really got finished. I think we played it once in a very early form in the Eagle in Manchester, but it was election night in 2015 and basically nobody turned up, so almost nobody had heard it before. In any case, I started sort of pulling songs off an old hard drive for our 10th anniversary tour last year, and I came across this and I thought, oh, this might be quite good to finish. And so I kind of tidied it up a bit, played it in the AnalogueTrash sort of artist get together, and we have kind of artist get togethers once every month or two. And Chris from Monitor said, "Could I have a go at writing lyrics for it?" So I thought, yeah, why not? Because I personally hate writing lyrics. And in any case, he took it away and he came back, and he didn't just come back with the lyrics, but he came back having actually sung it, and they did a bit of production work on it as well. And I thought, this sounds cracking. So anyway, here it is.
I was told take the labor of love, my son, as this world of ours shimmers on. I was told your beloved, she walks in snow, while the daughters lie in the shadows, and it ties to the
So I was thinking we're quite different bands. I think we kind of complement each other when we play, and I think there's some shared stuff going on there, isn't there? So
Yeah.
I would think maybe like Tangerine Dream could be maybe a common denominator. You've obviously listened
Massively so.
to Noi and some of this other stuff. So just say a little bit about your influences then.
When I was young, a lot of it came off kind of what my dad was listening to in the car. So that would have been, Jar, but also Vangelis. Mike Oldfield is a big one.
Oh yeah.
I mean, around the time it was in Dad's Auto Changer, it was sort of Tubular Bells 2 and that sort of thing. And that kind of remains probably my favourite album for nostalgic reasons. But I then went and dug out the rest of Mike Oldfield's kind of back catalogue, which is very diverse, actually, very diverse. Tangerine Dream was one I got into kind of slightly later, I think around 15 or 16. And for me, they have a very obvious sweet spot of the sort of late 70s, early 80s. Tangerine Dream has so much material, it's kind of hard to grasp it. It's like 140 albums
It's
or something
crazy
like that.
Yeah.
But for me, that's kind of peak Tangerine Dream era. And then there's more modern stuff in there as well. So artists like Royksop, we're probably not a million miles from in terms of influences. Post-rock actually has a bit of an influence on us as well. So 65 Days of Static, really love them. And Mogwai, which is kind of the default post-rock.
I mean, massive fans of both those bands, but that's interesting because I don't necessarily hear that in your music, but maybe it's more the way you structure and you use textures and stuff like that, and the dynamics of the songs that you play.
I think if there's anything that I would pick in our music that we take from bands like that, it's the sort of quiet, loud, louder thing, where the instrumentation and the structure of it builds up as the song goes on to a sort of crescendo before the end. This latest album is going to be a mix of a bit of everything. I'm trying to get away from the genreness actually to some degree, so and to try and make it a bit more sort of individual. But what about you? Where do the influences sit for Lines of Silence?
Well, I think it's quite interesting actually because I used to listen to everything, like when I was very young, and then as you get a bit older, I went through a bit of a prog rock stage, which then led me, funnily enough, into Tangerine Dream, and then much more psychedelic stuff, and then I kind of moved away from anything kind of spacey or psychedelic or proggy or whatever you want to call it, and just listened to lots of generic indie stuff for years, and then got really bored of that. And then when I started making music, I found all that stuff was kind of in my DNA, I suppose, musical DNA. So it just kind of came out, and that just led me to getting much more back into that stuff. So I mean, the crap rock stuff is obviously a massive influence, but there's just so many other things as well that kind of make their way through. And I think particularly working with Dave, we've got like a sort of a shared sort of interests in stuff like Factory Records, Joy Division, Durity Column, all that kind of stuff, and also some jazz stuff as well. Although I don't think either of us would claim to be able to play jazz, but the kind of approach, particularly like the Miles Davis electronic period, we were listening to that a lot when we recorded the last album. And I know what you mean about that. I mean, I think the stuff I really like is the sort of early 70s, but I've got a very soft spot for that when they start bringing the drum machines in the late 70s. And I've got a fantastic live album called Poland. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I love Poland. It's one of my favourites.
Yeah, and it's very much of its time, but it's fantastic. And the beats are, I don't know what it is in 808 they're using, but it just sounds fantastic.
It's great because they've whacked it through an absolutely massive reverb.
Yeah.
it sounds wonderful. It's I think Poland has got to be one of my favourite. Logos as well. The sort of Live at the Dominion was just, and they brought out a longer version of that on their box set 5 years ago now or something like that. It's just fabulous. One thing I forgot to mention actually, which I only really thought because you were mentioning that you went through a kind of phase of music that you then got bored with later. But I went through a really big classic rock phase. Sort of what you call dad rock these days. Sort of The Who and Led Zepp and all of that stuff. And Pink Floyd actually was probably where I got into that and then came out of it. But I suspect that's probably where my preference for overlong guitar sounding solos comes from. So my second track from the Lines of Silence discography, also from The Long Way Home, is the third track. It's called Phantom Galaxy. And I absolutely love this because it has the air of like a 70s detective show. You could imagine somebody walking into an office, taking off their hat and hanging it up. It's fantastic. It's so good. Have a listen to this.
No one's ever said that, but I like that. It's that wah-wah guitar, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
And you have your own studio.
I'm in it.
Is it a proper studio, or is it kind of like a shed with your synths in?
So on the plan of the house that we bought, it was labelled dining room. But I unilaterally decided we didn't need a dining room, and what we did need was a studio. So this is it. I'm sat in it at the moment. I'm surrounded by keyboards. But it's a privilege, to be honest, to have a space in my house that I've been able to dedicate to this, because I have to say for a long time it was in the corner of a bedroom, as it is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
What about you? Because I mean, for me, when I record stuff, it's all recorded directly into audio interfaces in the studio. There's no need for me to go out to a professional studio to record stuff for VIEON. But for you guys, you have normal instruments, So how does the recording process work for you?
Well, I mean, pretty much the same, to be honest. I mean, we haven't really had any vocal work, so we haven't had that sort of thorny issue to deal with. Guitar wise, I'll either feed my amp into an audio interface and record it that way, or I'll stick the pedals into the audio interface and then stick a sort of virtual amp on or something like that. So it's quite DIY really, and the percussion we've used has largely been electronic, so we haven't had the issue of recording. But I mean, like recording drums live is particularly sort of problematic, just to get the sound you want. And then when we were recording the last album, I would record a lot of ideas, or I might send some stems over to Dave. I work in Ableton, he works in Logic, which is always a bit fun trying to share WAV files and stuff like that. But and then he'd put some extra processing on top of it. I mean, I think if we get into recording vocals and more and things like that, I think we might think about going in and using a studio at least for some of it. But for now, we kind of manage and get by with sticky tape and stuff like that.
Live performance and otherwise, what does the next sort of 12 months do you think hold for Lines of Silence?
I think we're in quite an interesting place at the moment. So we were really pleased with the album that we put out in August, which is where you chose the tracks from, and now we're in a little bit of period of flux. So we've got Andrea's joined the band. She's a great singer, she's a great drummer, she can turn her hand to anything really. So we're going to be looking at ways to, I guess, sort of revisit our set a little bit. Is there something we can do to make it even more organic? Can we maybe even bring some live drums in? But like you say, like sizes of the stages we play usually kind of militate against that. But yeah, and we want to just start writing really. So Dave's quite busy on a lot of other projects. He may sort of get much more involved on the production engineering side, and the writing side maybe myself and Andrea, or it might be any other combination. But the number one thing is we want to just kind of keep going really, just kind of keep momentum going, keep writing, keep developing. So I'm not interested in repeating myself, so whatever we do next is going to be different. We're all just really keen just to kind of push on really. So who knows at the moment. But yeah, it sounds also that you say you've got the album. Have you got any more shows planned, or is it kind of heads down just trying to finish the album?
It's definitely the latter. One of the things I've found over the last couple of years is that we've written some music, then we've gone out and played some live shows, and sometimes I'd say the preparation for playing a tour, which is what we normally do now, because we normally promote our own shows. We're open to other promoters kind of approaching us, but when we want to go on a focused tour in a certain date range, it's easier to just organise it yourself through the right venues. What I tend to find is that I go out, we do these dates, and then I come back and I'm a little bit kind of burnt out on it, because the live show for me is so important, and it sucks up so much kind of mental energy preparing for each live show to try and make it bigger and better and more interesting than before, and adding different elements in. And to be perfectly honest, the studio recordings support the live act more than anything else. I say the live act is actually more important to us. So
it's just kind of quite interesting, like, as you say, for an electronic band, for it to be that way round. So primarily as a live act, but also producing the recorded stuff as well.
We just have fun live. We have so much fun when we're out on the road. Yeah, and to a degree, the other guys, whether they say it or not, I do get the sense of pressure. Like, we would like to go out and play some more live gigs. Could you hurry up and finish the album so that we've got something to promote, please?
I've been David from Lines of Silence.
And I've been Matt from VIEON.
And you've been listening to the Analog Trash Artist on Artist podcast. See you next time.